Hello and welcome to Digital Photo Mentor. I'm Darlene, and this week I am doing Lightroom tutorial demonstrations. So welcome. If you have submitted your images, I probably already have them loaded into my Lightroom ready to go. I've got some of the images from our regulars. If you're new here, every week I alternate between demonstrating photo editing using Lightroom, which is this week, and Luminar, which will be again next week. You can also catch any of the replays on our YouTube channel. Just head back to our channel and you can see all of them using the logo that says live and find all of the replays there. So there's lots of great nuggets of information if you've missed some past ones. So if you want to submit your images, if you've never done that, you'll see how it goes today. But I encourage you to send in some images. We're looking for I forget what theme we asked for last week, but we're looking for fall images in particular because it's fall in the northern hemisphere anyways, and things with water. So if you have lakes, oceans, streams, waterfalls, fountain even images, send me some of those, as well as some fall colors, the leaves changing colors using this link. So just go to that link. Rob will be in the chat. He is my husband, aka webmaster. And he'll be putting links in the chat if you're watching live. And if you're catching the replay, you'll be able to find that stuff in the description area below the video. So let me hop over to Lightroom and I will be right back. Okay, I've got quite a few good images to work on this week, and lots of our regulars here: Marty, Linton, Vivian. I think I have one of yours, Vivian. Stephanie, lovely fall day in Oregon. Then you can get out and get some fall photos. Absolutely. No, we are not looking forward to snow, Linton. Personally, I am not a skier and I don't do winter sports. So no, I'd love to come down under for the winter and visit you. Marguerite in Eastern Canada. And if any of you are watching, if you still have power in Florida and you're battening down the hatches for the hurricane, stay safe, everybody, while the hurricane hits the eastern coast of actually the western coast of Florida, because it's coming around the corner. So if you're in Florida and you're getting the hurricane coming, be safe. Okay, let's get started here. If you have any questions as we go along, I'm going to be demonstrating and I'm going to try and answer as many questions that you sent in with your images as well as live questions. So if you have any questions, I'll be asking for you to, vote and give your opinions on things if I do a couple of versions of edits. And please feel free to do that in the chat if you're watching live. Okay, so let me just see. I've got, do I have an image of Stephanie's? Yes. Oh, and she's got a lovely fall image. So I may actually want to hang on to this one, Stephanie, so we can do all the fall ones at the same time. That's quite lovely. This one could be considered fall, but that's more like flowery. Let's see, Marty, it could be fall, not really colorful, but we can see what we can do with that. And is Danny here? Because he sent me some lovely portraits. Danny sent 4, or perhaps Danny is a she, I'm not sure, Danielle. They've sent me 4 lovely portraits, and I'd love to do these if you're watching. So I'm probably going to start with some of these because we haven't done portraits in a while, and I've got sort of 4 here, and I've got some from Holly that I could probably pull in as well, although she's more of a Luminar person. So let me see. So Danny is using both Lightroom and Luminar, and that is the combination of software that I would use to do portraits. So let's take a look at those. And Stephanie says she's okay with waiting on hers, so that's great. Thanks, Stephanie. So if you've got some fall images, please send them in. Now, one thing I will notice and mention about Danny's images is that they are JPEG. So I'm not sure if they're shooting RAW or not. But if you do have RAW files, Danny, best to send me those. Sorry, I tried not to yawn. Best to send me the raw files because I will be able to do more with them in Lightroom and in Luminar, right? So you've got more exposure latitude with a raw file. Oh, interesting. So he's shooting, or he or she, Danny is shooting with an X-T4 Fuji and the 56 1.2 lens, which I literally just rented a couple of weeks ago and did a photo shoot with, and then bought the Sigma version of that lens myself, and I haven't tested it yet. So that's cool that they've got this 56 Fuji lens. That's a great option. And then a couple that look like they were done in the studio. So I actually did this one in Luminar, and it came out really well because it has that background blur. But I want to do a kind of a comparison. Okay. So I want to do, let's do this image in Lightroom, and I'll show you some of the things that I created to make it simpler in terms of presets and things. And you can copy and paste from one image to the other. And then I'll do basically the same sort of editing in Luminar as well and show you the difference, or we can compare the two. Okay. So I'm going to start in here with this one and go to the develop module. And generally, the first thing I do is go and change the color profile. But because this is not a raw file, there's no camera profiles attached here. This one, yeah, these ones are all JPEG. So because they're not a raw file, you don't get that option of the camera profiles. So I could start with, a modern one or an artistic one and see what they look like if I want to check out some of these different tones, right? That was kind of neat for a matte look. But I want something that's just sort of regular processing. But look at this one here. Even this one called Vintage Number One. If I hover my mouse over, you can see my cursor here. Just hover over Vintage One. It gives it lots more contrast. So I might even start with that one. Artistic. You know what? To be honest, I'm going to start with just the default one, and we're going to do all of this edits in the basic panel here. Okay, so if you've watched before, you'll know my trick about the shift double click on the white slider. So if you hold your shift key down, double click on the word whites, what it does is it pops the white slider up as high as it needs to go to touch the edge of the graph with the white. So then you have a nice, I'm trying to point this the same way in my video, you have a nice edge of the histogram, meaning it's touching the edge, and that's a good thing because now you have pure white. Okay. Then I want to do the same. So holding the shift key, double click on the word blacks. Now you notice it didn't move. Okay. So I'm going to try this one manually. So I'm going to hold down the Alt Option key this time. And then when I click on the slider, it shows me areas that are clipping or have no detail. And in areas like this chair here that I'm going to end up cropping out anyways, I don't really care if I have detail, right? And I want to go fairly dark on her hair. We could punch up the shadows a little bit. But let's crop it because this part here down at the bottom is not really adding anything to the image. So how I'm deciding what I'm doing to the image is as important as how I'm doing it, right? So I've done the whites and the blacks to give it a little bit more contrast. So if I just look at the before and after, it just punches it up a little bit. But let's crop this one, and I'm going to go off the normal aspect ratio, and I'm just going to crop freeform because I don't need to see this bench or most of her arm. Okay. Now I'm looking at where her eye position is, sort of in this rule of thirds here. If I want her eyes a little bit more off center, right, I could crop in so that her eyes sort of hit this third here. Okay. So that's actually not a bad cropping, something like that. Okay. Let's see how that looks. Great. Maybe a little bit more this way. And the trouble is her fingers are going to get cut off. I'd like to have her face more over here, but I lose her fingers. Okay. So when I was shooting this, I would give her a little more space, less space above or less space below, more space above, and then just be conscious of appendages and where you're cropping. Okay. So for me, this is a more powerful crop. We see her face more and less of the stuff around her. Okay. Now I'm going to take a look at the blacks again, and I'm actually going to lower the exposure overall. Another thing I do on almost every single image is an edge vignette, and I have presets already made to do that. And when I click on it, it's a one-click deal. And what it does is it literally just changes the sliders in the effects panel. Right? So you can make your own. You could see as I click on these, right, it's changing the sliders and it's changing the look. So I usually choose to start with one of these, and then I can darken it or adjust it from there. But what that's doing is taking away the attention from her arms. Okay, so see how her arms are the lightest thing at the bottom of the picture? I want to make sure that her face is the brightest thing and I get attention there. Okay, so leave that on. Ideally, when photographing, again, I would have had her take off this little hair tie on her wrist, and possibly even the necklace if we're not seeing the whole necklace. So it's those kinds of things that are little details when you're doing a portrait that you want to pay attention to. Right? She's got nice soft light on her face. She does have some blemishes. So in Lightroom, there's not an automated way to take care of that. But let's just do what we can. She's got some nice makeup. And let's just see if we can enhance what's already there. I also see there's this little highlight on her earring over here that's kind of bugging me, so I'm probably just going to get rid of it. Okay. Let's see. Ray said I was going to do one of his landscape images. Return to that image and edit at a later date. Yes. Last session. All right, I will check for that one, Ray, because yes, I did have computer issue and I had to close out. Do you see your image here? Let me just take a look. Are any of these yours? I see Linton's, Leroy, Marty. I don't see one by Ray. Refresh my memory what it looks like, and I'll try and find it for you, Raymond. Okay, so continuing on with this one, I've now just punched the contrast a little bit and added the vignette, right? So you can see that her face is more prominent now, right? Then I'm going to go back up into the basic panel and do things like adjusting the white balance, okay? Again, if this is a RAW file, you'd have presets here available. When you shoot a JPEG or you have a JPEG to start with, all you have is these two options. So let's see what auto comes up with. She looks a little green to me, so I'm not crazy about that. So I'm just going to try the eyedropper on her white clothes. Okay, so this eyedropper here is what's called a targeted adjustment tool. And you can hover over anything that's white. Let me open this navigator, or black. Now look at the preview in that upper left-hand corner. So see as I hover over this area of her top that's really blue, the image is going to become really warm or yellow because that's the opposite of blue. So it's trying to filter out the blue. If I put it over the background here, which is fairly magenta, you can see that it's going to be more sort of green as I move around. So I'm not sure if her top is the best choice because it's fairly blue. I could try her hair. Actually, that's not too bad. Okay, so see how it added a bunch of yellow and took away magenta. Now, if I decide that's gone too far, I can just dial them back a little bit. Okay, that's already infinitely better. Okay, so let's just do a before and after. So now she's got a little bit of color. We've adjusted the darkness and the brightness. Now with this bottom section here, you want to be really careful about doing clarity on portraits because look what happens, right? It's not a good thing on skin, especially where there's any sort of, I don't want to say imperfections, but not smooth parts, okay? So anything that's sort of a bump or a ridge will be enhanced using clarity, and likewise with texture. So we want to minimize those things. So when we're doing these are global edits applying to the whole image. I will keep the clarity really low, okay? Like no more than about 12 or so for a person image, okay? When we want to deal with sharpening, that's in the detail panel, okay? And sharpening, I'm just going to move this around so you can see her eye. Now this is just a convenient 100% view of a certain spot. And if it's not in the place where you want it, you can either click this thing here and then set your target or just move it around in the window, okay? So it just allows you to see that spot close up. So with the sharpening sliders, if I go to 100%, let's just take these to the nth degree and go 100% on everything. Now you can see that her skin is being over sharpened and it's picking up extra things with the pores. Okay, can you see that? It's also adding grain to the background. Now I don't know the camera information on this because again, it's a JPEG, so I don't know what ISO it was taken at. But watch what happens with this masking slider, and this is the benefit of this slider right here. When you increase masking slider, and if you do it with your Alt key pressed down, you'll see where it's applying. But as you increase the masking slider, it's going to remove it off of areas that are smooth. So as I go to 100%, you can see the background start to smooth out and some of her skin. Okay. If I zoom out, and do the same thing with my Alt button pressed. Okay, wherever you see white currently, that means it's a mask that's applying this effect or sharpening everywhere. Okay, as I increase it, wherever you see white, that's the only place it's applying. So now you can see that it's only applying on the edges, which is what we want in a portrait, right? And then obviously this is way too high, so I'm just going to dial this back. So now when we look at it at 100%, okay, if I dial it down, you can see that it does indeed sharpen up the eyes, okay? And I may give her a tiny little bit of noise reduction as well because it looks like it's picking up some noise reduction. And this is where I talk a lot about this dance of photo editing, especially with things like sharpening and noise. And there's no coincidence that they're in the same panel because as you increase sharpening, you get more noise, as we just saw. As you increase noise reduction, you get more blur. But if you put them both to 100%, you basically just get a big giant mess. Right? You'll end up with something that looks like this, right? Which is not realistic at all. Okay. So let me undo all my mess. There we go. So keep everything subtle on these sliders, okay, as necessary. And if you have to go to another plugin like Topaz or even now Luminar Neo with the new noiseless plugin extension, you'll do a better job with that than using the noise reduction in Lightroom. It's not the best, right? Okay, so now we have sort of basic editing done, and I have some other presets that I can use to apply skin tone. Okay, so again, these are things that I created and are part of my Lightroom preset package. Okay, and I'm also going to be creating some new ones, and I'll show you how to make one for portraits. I showed this in my Lightroom course. So let's do this one here. So as I hover over, you can see that this one here changes the skin tone. So this one actually gives her a suntan, so darkens her skin. We can lighten the skin. Remove sunburn is actually great if you have somebody that has lots of red in their skin, right? So if I click on remove sunburn, you see how it's taking the red out of her cheeks like that? Or the general enhance. And where these are applying is in this HSL panel, okay? So the remove sunburn is lowering the saturation on red, and it's also shifting the red to the orange side, so it's less red, if that makes any sense, okay? And when you have somebody that has blemishes, that can be helpful, okay? Because you'll actually just lower the saturation and the redness on those blemishes. Okay? But keep in mind, it's going to affect her lips as well. So if her lips are the same tone, right, you can remove the red and the blemishes, but now she's got gray lips, okay? And that's one of my pet peeves with the Lightroom HSL panel is you can't mask it using this tool. You can in Luminar though, okay? So that's one benefit of Luminar. Okay, the next thing I created for my Lightroom course is a preset called Skin Smoothing. And I'm just going to apply it, and then I'll show you how it works. Right? So once I've clicked on it, what it does and how to make your own is it's literally created a mask. Okay? And if I turn the mask on, you can see that it's applying just to her skin. So what I did was I'll actually just undo this and show you how to make one for yourself. Okay? So what you want to do is select open the masking tool. So now we're going to be doing selective edits or partial parts of the image to edit. Okay, so I'm going to click on this masking tool and choose color range. Then I can come in a little closer. I'm just going to draw a little section over her skin. So you can just draw a little square or rectangle over the color that you want to use. And then you can refine it by saying, okay, I want to get more of her skin because I want to make sure I get all the way to the edge. I want to get more of her skin, right? Then the problem is it's also picking stuff up in the background, which we don't want. Okay, so then I'm just going to intersect it. Okay, so intersect means it has to match two criteria. It has to match this color range that I just chose, and it has to match being part of the subject that Lightroom deems the subject. Okay, so now once I've intersected it, now it's only finding this part of her skin. Okay, and if I wanted to take it a step farther and not select her arms, right, I could actually say, okay, I want to subtract and then maybe just draw a radial gradient, right? Something like this. And then obviously I need to invert it because it's selecting the inside. So I just invert it. See, now it's not selecting her arms as much, okay? So we can just work on her face only. If we get a little bit of her arms, that's okay. Like so. Okay, so that's how you can use these tools in combination to make a really powerful mask. Then what I did was, I'm just going to hit this smoothing one again, is I just created a preset. Okay, so I just clicked plus and created a preset called skin smoothing. But you have to apply the edits that you want to apply before you save your preset. Okay, so I'm just going to go back here and apply this one again. Okay. Now you notice that it added a mask. So I'm just going to delete this one that I created. Actually, let me delete both of them. So I'm going to go skin smoothing. There's the mask. And if it didn't get the right color, you can just check, right? You can also readjust it, okay? Like so. So now I've got her skin selected. And you can see the adjustments that I did was I added contrast, okay? So plus 30. I lowered the shadows, so I actually darkened the shadows. Okay, so see what that's doing is it's actually sort of giving her more contouring on her face. You see on the cheeks, if I go really far, okay. I added a little bit of white, okay, so that's actually giving her more punch on her face. You see the contrast difference between here and the shadows now. I could actually add a little black as well. Then I did a minus texture and minus clarity, as well as minus sharpness, minus 15, and saturation, minus 5. The minus saturation is, I find that when you start doing stuff like this on the skin, you don't want her to end up looking like this, okay? You don't want her to end up like she's been in the tanning salon too long and she's overbaked herself, okay? So let's just see what this is doing. Okay. See how that's smoothing her skin? Let me zoom in. Okay, see how it's smoothing her skin, but still leaving the contrast. There's a preset under here in Lightroom, I believe, that comes with Lightroom called skin smoothing or skin soften and so on. But I find that it doesn't do enough adjustments. And if you only do minus clarity or minus sharpness, you lose contrast. Okay. So let me just show you a comparison. So I'm just going to call this one skin good. Okay, and then I'm going to turn it off. And then I'm going to do another one. Select the skin again. Oops. Let's do another one. So I'm selecting the color. Intersect with the subject. So I've just got her. Okay. And now watch what happens if I just do minus clarity and minus sharpness and minus texture. Right? Look at how sort of flat and textureless her skin is, but not just that. It seems like there's no lighting. It's very even. Okay. So I'm going to call this one skin bad. Okay. And then let's turn it off and turn this one back on. Can you see the difference? right? There's more highlights on her bridge of her nose, her cheeks, this part, and then it goes into shadow, okay? Versus the other one, which just makes her look like a pancake, okay? So no three-dimensionality, okay? That's what I'm looking for, okay? Now, if you want to do blemishes in Lightroom, you have to do them all with the spot tool, okay? So that's with the healing tool. I need to go them one by one, okay? I'm not going to do that because I want to show you how to do this in Luminar. So I'm actually going to turn off both of these masks, okay, for now. Actually, I'll delete the bad one. We don't need that one. And I'm going to go from here, right, into Luminar. Okay, so we've kind of got some basic edits. I'm happy with where it is so far. I think I want a darker vignette, but we'll come back to that. So I'm going to take this one to Luminar. Okay, if you want a true non-destructive editing, you want to go to Photoshop as a smart object first and then go to Luminar. But in the essence of speed today, I'm just going to go straight to Luminar. And I'm going to edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustment. So I'm going to start from where I've just left off, taking this one to Luminar. So we're kind of doing a combination edit this week with both. Okay? So let me get Luminar opened. It's thinking about it. And let's see if there's any questions over here. Any questions that I've missed, Rob? Or are you guys just chatting about all kinds of stuff? Hey, Juan Jose, bienvenidos, amigo. And looks like you're talking about Star Trek and Wizard of Oz. Have I missed anything? I'm good. Okay. All right. So I've got Luminar. And there is an update that just came out for Luminar. So if you haven't done that already, make sure that you're using 1.4.0 because they did add a clone tool, clone and stamp tool. Okay. So over here in Luminar, I've created some presets. Okay, now notice that there's one called Danny because I told you I was playing with this image earlier in Luminar in the standalone version. So I'm just going to apply this one. Oops, not rename it. I'm just going to apply this one to this image. And you'll see as soon as it applies the effect that I did in here previously. I think I've gone a little too far, but we can scale it back. Okay, but look at the big difference. And that was with one click. Okay, my vignette looks a little bit heavy, so we can definitely scale that back. Because once we apply the preset, I can go back down in here and apply any of the edits. Okay, so it looks like I've brightened the face for some reason. Yes, let's go. I've brightened the face, so I did lots of face light. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the beginning. You can see that I've lightened her face. I'm going to dial it back a tiny bit. If we want to slim her face, we can. I don't think she needs to have her face slimmed. But the cool thing that happens in here, the magic, is you can do things with the eyes, right? Automated that you can't do in Lightroom automated. You can do this in Lightroom, but you have to do an individual brush stroke or radial filter for all of them. So I've actually changed her eye color. Okay, so if I go with her original eye color, you can see it's kind of a bluish green. So I chose her eye color that was as similar as possible. And now I can enhance the eyes. I can brighten the eyes, whiten the whites of the eyes. Be careful not to make demon people. Okay, so be very careful. Remove dark circles under the eyes. Look at that. See that? Darken her eyebrows. And then also, if her teeth are showing, we can whiten teeth or darken lips. Okay, so if I want to give a little more darkness to her lips, we can do that. Okay. If I do enlarge eyes, again, be careful with this one. If somebody has sort of squinty eyes, you can use this to combat that problem. But she doesn't. So I'm just going to stick with the basics. Then in the next tool, this is where the magic really happens on portraits like this. Because look at this. Right? So amount is how much smoothing on the skin is being applied. Okay. Shine removal is taking off those bits of shine off of the forehead. Okay. And skin defects removal, right? Look at what this is doing on her blemishes. It's getting almost all of them. And I've tested it on lots of images, and it does a really good job distinguishing the difference between a freckle and a blemish. Okay. So combination of the smoothing and the skin defects removal is doing a really nice job on her skin. And there's only a couple that I might have to go and use the erase tool or the new cloning tool on. Okay. Then I did an Orton effect, which is a glow. Okay, so it's just giving an overall glow. Then I did the portrait bokeh tool, which allows me to do a bunch of different things, right? I need to sort of mask out a little bit around her because it's not masking around the hair. But I find that if I paint with the focus mask or the focus brush at 50% and just go around the edge of the person once, it does a really good job of sort of blending those edges in. Maybe I'll go one more time just in this area. So I'm seeing a little bit of a halo here. I just want to blend it a little bit nicer. So see, 2 quick brush strokes through there. And what this is doing is it's cooling the background off. Okay, so I'm adding blue to the background. Okay, and blurring it even more. Okay, so if you don't have a lens with a wide aperture, we can actually use this tool to blur the background more. Okay, so it's really great. We can also darken the background, which is what I've done here. So we can decide if we want it to be brighter and do more of a high key portrait, like so, or darker. I think darker goes better with this one because she stands out more, okay? But it also matches her eyes a little better to have a little bit more blue, okay? And it looks like I added a vignette that's a little on the heavy side, so I'm going to dial the feather down to 0, which shows me where the vignette was placed. And then I'm just going to pick the subject and resize it a little better. And then dial it back a bit. That's a little heavy-handed. Oh, now I'm seeing some blue down here. Okay, so that's telling me actually that my portrait bokeh is probably picking up. Yeah, it's missed part of her down here. So I just have to paint her in. So it thought that was part of the background. We can fix that. Super easy. There we go. So now, okay, so once I get this loading, there's the before coming from Lightroom and after coming from Luminar. And because I created that preset, because one of Danny's questions was that if you want to do batch processing, what is the best way to do that? Okay, so you can save presets in Lightroom, like I just showed you with the skin, but you can also save the preset in Luminar. Okay, so if you have a bunch of these images to do, like what I did here with this one, I saved it called Danny, right? I could just save it as a preset. So I'm going to call this one Danny 2. And then if I don't need them again, or if I find they're not applicable to other sets of images, I just delete those presets. Okay, but I'm pretty happy with that edit. Okay, so I find that there's some weird stuff going on down here. I might want to come back here and get rid of that, maybe with the erase tool, and pick up the rest of those blemishes that it missed. The erase tool is really good in Luminar. And again, if you are using Lightroom, it's a fantastic plugin. Okay, so part of the reason that I'm demonstrating this, even though it's Lightroom Day, is that I use Luminar with my portrait editing flow every single time. Every single time. If you could please share the link to the video review of Luminar. I've just made a mess of her arm down there. I have to clean up this stuff. I'm not sure why she's got blue on her arm down here. But I'm going to do these blemishes here. And it's super easy because I can just click on them like this. Select them all and then just erase. So the review of Luminar Neo that I just did, please, Rob, if you could share the link to that. Remember I said I want to get rid of this earring, so I'll probably get rid of that as well. There we go. It just the highlight was bugging me. Okay, so see how it's really quick to get rid of these things. that the portrait tool missed, but it didn't miss very many, right? It's pretty good. Maybe a couple more up here. Okay. And I don't need to make her a perfect Barbie doll. You know, she's a real person, right? So I want to make sure that she still has some texture in her skin, which is why I really love the smoothing in Luminar, because you can still see her pores, right? If I zoom in, you can still see that she has actual pores in her skin, right? While I'm here, I think I'm going to get rid of this hair on her forehead as well. Let's see what we do with that. See? Super easy. All right, let me see if I can do a better job with this blue stuff down here. For some reason, she's got blue on her arm. Yeah, something came through from somewhere else. I'm not sure. If I can't get rid of it here, I'll deal with it back in Lightroom. Okay, we're getting close now. So this is where the erase tool is not working perfectly, and I might try the new cloning tool. So you find that down the bottom on a professional, and it allows you to set where you are cloning from, okay, and where you are cloning to. Oops, let me reset that. Right, so see how I set clone from, clone to, like so. I got to play with this one a little bit more, to be honest. I'm not 100% up on this cloning tool. So I've kind of made a little bit of mess of her arm here. And I'm still getting that over here. So let's fix that. I think it's this guy doing it. Yep. See, it's not masking her arm properly. There we go. I think that will fix the problem. So sometimes the portrait bokeh gets the mask wrong, and it made a bit of a mess. Okay. I'm just going to delete that cloning. And under the erase, I'm just going to reset this part here. So if you make a mistake with the erase tool, right, remember it's in your edits. Just go back here. I have to wait for it to catch up. And just do restore, and it will put it back to how it was. Still something funny. Yeah, it's on her arm from Lightroom, so maybe she's got a bruise. All right, so we're done with that, taking it back to Lightroom. Let's see how we're doing. David and Rob are talking about, what are you guys talking about? Wizard of Oz. Okay, so there is the Luminar version, and that's what I was able to create in Lightroom. Let me just turn the mask back on again, okay? So can I do the background blur in here in Lightroom? Yes, okay? So if I want to add another mask, I can just do create, select subject, and then invert it, okay? Which will then give me the background. And I can do the same kinds of things, right? I can blur it like so, and then I can just add some blue. Okay, so you definitely can do a similar kind of thing in Lightroom with the background. And you can actually go quite dramatic with the color if you want different colors. Right? You can literally make it any color you want. In Luminar, you can warm it up yellow or cool it down blue. But I could make green, purple, red. I could make whatever color we want. Right? So we'll just pick a blue. The thing that I can't do, though, is some of the automated stuff. So the skin blemish removal, the brightening of the eyes, the enlarging of the eyes. If you want to do any of those things, you'd have to go to Photoshop or do more masking on individual parts of the image. Right? But if we look at them side by side, right, the Luminar one is on the right, and I could mask this mask a little better here on her arm as well. And the Lightroom one is here. So they're pretty similar, right? But see how this facial light really brought out her face on this one as well. Okay. So now if I want to do something similar with this one, okay, which is a totally different type of look, I can do the basic editing again. And do we have camera profiles? No. Okay, so I'm just going to do whites, blacks, double click. And I find that she's a little bright, so that's kind of a better exposure. And she's a little blue, so I'm just going to warm her up a tiny bit. Let's see what auto gives us. Eek, blue, blue, blue. So no, we don't want that. So I'm just going to warm her up a little bit. And I'm going to crop it because I feel like these lines should be straight. So I'm just going to do auto to try and get these vertical lines straight vertical. Okay. Something like that. Okay, so her composition within this frame is kind of cool. The only thing that I might do is see how there's a part of this window that's captured sort of what I would call outside. Like I want to almost frame her with this door. So if I come in a little bit on the bottom to get rid of this bright area on the corner, that's better. Now it still feels crooked to me. I still feel like she's leaning over. Something like that. Okay, so that feels like a slightly stronger composition to me. And if we want to keep the space on the bottom, we can just crop it off the normal aspect ratio. Okay. Give her a little bit of clarity. Remember, don't go too far. Okay. Now she's very light skinned. I'm going to do a very gentle vignette. So let's do, actually a strong vignette works well here. And let's do gentle suntan and see if we can't give her a little bit of skin tone. There we go. Right. So see how she already stands out because of the lighting. Okay. Now, if we look at her skin, she's got really beautiful skin. She does have, it looks like maybe a burn. So she could be a burn victim. And you want to be really conscious of if somebody has a scar, not removing it, right? Unless they specifically ask you. I don't know why that's showing the other picture, but that's weird, right? If they have something like a scar and they want it removed, right, definitely discuss it with them ahead of time. Otherwise, I would not remove scars, right? So I can do my skin smoothing preset again. And because she doesn't have blemishes, we may not need to use Luminar. Let's see what we selected here. Okay, so color range. Okay, it's picking up her dress, right? Because where the color range thing fell on the other image, it didn't pick up her skin. So I'm going to reselect her skin as the color range. So that's all you need to do in a preset like this to make it work, right? So now you can see that it is, softening the skin. And if I zoom in to her, right? Let's see what it's doing. I think it's softening a little bit too much, actually. So I'm going to dial that back. And if anything, I'm going to give her more contrast. Okay, so see by adding black, I'm actually adding the tones into her skin more. Okay, so contrast with shadows and blacks. So you don't want to remove shadows and blacks. Right? You want to keep them. You need those. You need those highlights. Okay. Now for me, her eyes are a little bit dark. So I'm going to create another mask, and I'm just going to do a paintbrush at 100%. And I'm going to use, again, the paintbrush mask and make sure that my circle is just slightly bigger than her eye. Can you see that right here? Okay. And I'm just going to paint over both eyes like so. And I have a preset called Fix Dark Eyes and Face. Right? And what it does is it increases the exposure, lowers the highlights, pushes the shadows up, increase the whites, right? And basically I'm trying to brighten that area a little bit. You see what that's doing? Watch her eyes. Let me zoom in. Okay, watch her eyes. Okay, see how it's brightening? And if it's not going enough, I can increase the whites. Okay, see how that's working? Be very conscious of going overboard. That's overboard. Okay. And be very conscious of just pushing up one slider. Okay, that's where you start to get stuff that doesn't look real. Okay, if you just push the shadows up, it looks flat. But look at how natural. You don't know that I'm lighting that. Okay, that looks wonderful. Okay, now if we want to play with color or toning, for me, this one would work really well with something called a LUT. And if you want to do that in Lightroom, you have to get them installed in here as color profiles. So it's a little bit more work, right? Or we could pick one of these sort of, maybe vintage ones and see what that looks like. So I've done sort of my basic editing, and this is just changing like the toning. That one's kind of cool. Or if we want to apply an actual LUT, then we'd have to hop over to either Photoshop or, again, Luminar. Does anybody see one there that they like? I'm kind of thinking, like tone down the blue, but keep the dress red. I kind of like that one. She reminds me of like a Spanish flamenco dancer. I want to have a big red flower in her hair, and she's got some castanets off to go do Spanish dancing. So this one works for me. And when you apply these profiles, you can actually dial them up or down. Okay. So if I want to increase the effect, I can do that. And look what a cool thing that's doing. It's really punching up the red and dialing everything back down. Right? So you can get as contrasty a look as you want. Okay? Now, if I like what I've done here and I want to apply it to another image, I can just do Command or Control C for copy. And I don't want to copy the cropping, but I want to copy everything except cropping, including the masks. Okay. The mask, actually, let me name these. Okay. So if you name your masks, this one is skin, and this one is eyes. Okay. So then when I do copy, I could say I want the skin mask, but I don't want the eye mask. Okay, because the eye mask was painted into a very specific area on this image, and it probably is not going to translate if I paste it onto another one. And I don't want the crop. So everything except those two things. I'm going to copy, and then I'm going to do Command Control V to paste. Okay. Now it's given the same vintage look. Okay, so we can change that or dial it down. Right. We can check the skin and make sure that it's chosen the right color range. Okay, so that we got the skin. But we need some work on these basic settings here because this one has gotten way too contrasty and too bright. So I'm just going to double click this word here. Let me get my mouse back. If you double click the header of any of these sections, it will reset the sliders in that section. Okay. I'm going to reset white balance as well. She looks a little bit too yellow. Let's see what auto does on this one. Okay, that definitely warmed her up because she looks really blue. If we know for sure that this is a white wall, I can use this eyedropper, and that's probably pretty close. Or we know this is a black dress, I can use her black dress. Okay, so you have to use something neutral to put the eyedropper on. Okay. Now this one, again, because it's a JPEG, right, we've added lots of contrast here. Where have we added contrast? It's probably that vintage. So let's change that back to just standard color because she's getting too much contrast. Okay. She's still getting too much contrast. Where are we getting that contrast from? Probably in here. So I'm going to undo all of these as well. Okay. Somewhere she's still getting contrast. I'm going to start over, right? So the copy and paste on this one didn't work so well. The lighting conditions are very different, so they didn't translate. So I'm going to start over, and I'm just going to do, see the white, double click. It's going to actually try and lower it, okay, because it's picking up the highlight in her necklace. So I'm not going to be too worried about the necklace. And we'll have a little bit of black, a little bit of clarity again. Okay. And let's do that white balance. I think the wall works pretty well. Somewhere up in here. She looks a little magenta. Something like that. Now, if we want to push the shadows up a little, again, try not to do stuff like this where you push the shadows up and the highlights down on a person, especially with increased clarity, because look at the final result. It's not flattering for her, okay? So let's just undo that. Keep these in moderate amounts, okay? So I'm trying to lower the contrast by lowering the highlights, increasing the shadows a little bit, and lowering contrast a little bit. I could also do that with the curve, okay? So I'm just checking. Give the black stripe over there, and I want to make sure that it's straight. And let's leave a little stripe over there. So now she's just kind of in between these two stripes, okay? If we want to make sure that it's absolutely straight up and down, use transform, okay? If we do guided, this one will work really well because I can just start at the top of the wall. So it gives you this little crosshairs thing, okay? So I can click at the top of this wall and then the bottom, and then the same here, and it will straighten those, okay? So now those lines are perfectly vertical, okay? And there's no other horizontal lines to straighten, so we call that done. So I just hit escape. And one idea that I had here is we've got a black line here on the edge of the image. Let's make this darker on this side. So I'm going to do a linear gradient and make it pretty narrow, but let's just see if I can match it up to this line. So I want to get it right on the wall like that, okay? And just darken. Now, if I keep these lines closer together, right, there's less of a fade, right? Let me do an extreme example, okay? So if I'm darkening, spread them apart, you get fade across. See that? Closer together, more of a line, okay? So I want to make that line coincide with the actual edge of the wall, like so. So now she's basically in between two black lines. Maybe lighten that one just a bit. Now there's some color over there, so I'm going to desaturate it as well because I want it to be more of a gray scale. Now, if we're having trouble seeing these tones, you can actually change the background color of Lightroom. Did anybody know that? Okay, so you can actually change it to black. Now we can see the edges, or any other tone. Okay, so you can change it from white to black. So if you're having trouble seeing your image, you can do it on black. Oh, I was locked up for a minute. Everything okay? So how are we liking this one? To me, this is a perfect kind of image to make a black and white out of. And I'm thinking that I want to give her a little more space on this side now that I've darkened it. But this one for me is begging to be black and white. So I'm just going to go with it. And then we can go to the black and white panel. So when you click black and white up here, okay, so the right way to do black and white is not to do desaturate. Okay, so you don't want to just do desaturation because then you got what you got. You can't do anything with it. Okay, you want to make sure that you click this black and white treatment up here. Then you'll notice the HSL panel has now changed to black and white. And you have these color sliders, right? So the colors in the original image are still there, you're just not seeing them. But now look, we can brighten her face because skin tone has a lot of orange. Okay. Red, if we want to darken the red, that's her lips and the other side of her face. Okay. So see the difference? And if we just do desaturate, we don't have that option. Right? And look at blue. There's blue in the shadow and on the edges. Okay, so we can darken those even more. Just seeing where each of these applies. Let's see if there's any yellow. Okay, so yellow is more on the side of her face. I don't think that one is needed. And no, we don't need green either. Okay, so look at the difference, right? We have more control over the tones. So I think this is a really cool image, actually, in terms of a fashion kind of image. We could make it really contrasty. And generally with black and white, I like to have more contrast. So I'll go and add what's called an S curve, where I'm pushing the highlights up and pulling the highlight or the shadows down. Okay. Let me just undo that a little bit here. Can you please share the video link for the curves tutorial? Stephanie said, I like the black and white. The shadow on her face seems less. It seems to blend better, right? Like when it was in color, like the color tones were just a little odd, right? She blends a little better, right? And I could do a general lighten of her whole face as well. Like if I want to, add just a radial gradient on her face, okay, so I got a circle here. I can just punch the shadows up a little bit, and that tends to help. Okay, so I'm lowering again the contrast on her face. See what that's doing? Just brightening her a little bit. So call that one face. This one is wall. So something like that goes into something like that. I like the tall, narrow composition of this one, right? Because if we include this window, right, see, it doesn't really add anything to the picture, right? If we look at it, just the image, the window is a little bit distracting and the stuff that's out there, right? If we want to keep the cropping and the composition, I could add another graduated filter. Let me do another one. So linear gradient again. And if I hold my shift key down when I drag out from this side, it will keep it straight so it doesn't tilt. So I'm just going to keep it narrow again. Drag it up to this edge. And I'm going to darken, highlight down. And let's maybe just do less clarity so it's just darkens it a little bit. How's that? So we're just minimizing this stuff outside, right? Things like this edge really bug me. There's this little white bit on the edge there, really bug me. So I would just crop in a tiny bit. See the difference there? It's just that little white bit on the edge, really bothersome. And if I come in to look at her face a little bit closer, right? She could use some skin smoothing for sure. So I would probably pull this one over to Lightroom as well. It looks like she's got a lot of makeup on and she's got some shine here, right? So I could try this skin smoothing one, right? And it's definitely helping, right? So there we go. That's helpful. Skin smoothing. Let's just check the color range. Okay. There we go. Get her skin. Okay, so see, this is one we have to be careful when I'm lowering the texture and the clarity, that it's actually removing sort of contrast as well. Okay, so these are a good thing to soften her skin, but you want to make sure that we don't lose the nice contrast. Okay? So that's better. Before and after. really cool, dramatic image, right? Danny's got some really neat images in terms of fashion, right? And again, we could save this as a preset. So if I like what I'm doing here in terms of I like the contrast and so on, we could save this as a preset, right? And then you get to decide, you know, which part of it you want to save, just like when you're copy and pasting. Okay, so if I want to save, you know, the mask one, which is the skin, I don't necessarily want to save the edges, the wall edges. I don't want to save cropping, which generally is not part of a preset. Okay, so all of these things I can save. Okay? You know, this one here, the transform, was doing the correction, so I don't want to save that either. Okay, so if I want to save a preset, I could just call this black and white fashion or high contrast black and white. Okay, and then all of these bits get saved. Now, if I decide I want to add a color tone, which is under color grading now, the neat thing about doing that is you can add it to the shadows only. Okay, so increase your saturation first and then pick the hue. So for me, something sort of blue might be really neat with this image. Okay, so if I want to create a blue tone, something like that. Okay, and I'm making note of the hue, 232, because if I want to do the same on the midtones, we'll get something similar. So we create this blue. Okay. And then for something different, we go to the highlights, and we're actually going to go yellow. Yeah, and just keep that down a bit. So see what that's doing in terms of color grading, giving it a different look. Now, if I want to update that preset, okay, this one that I called high contrast black and white, I could update it with the current settings. Okay, so I just right click and choose update. Or I could save another one and just call it high fashion split tone or high fashion blue tone or something like that. Okay. Let's see how we're doing here. So the only other one I haven't done is this one. And I played around with this one in Luminar as well, where I was blurring the background. Well, let's see how we can do that same thing in Lightroom. So let's see. This is the Lightroom one that we did. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to copy this again. And did I blur the background? Yes, I did. Okay, so let's rename this one background. Okay, so that's why it's important to name your masks, because then when you're copying or pasting or making a preset, you can see what they are. Okay, so I want skin, and I didn't transform anything, so it doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to paste onto this one. Okay, so there's a lot of automation happening that we have to double check. Okay, so skin, we want to make sure that the color range is picking her skin. Okay, so that's good. It's got her skin. Now she's kind of gotten a little dark, so if anything, I'm going to brighten her a little bit. But I'm going to come back to that one because her arms are brighter than her face, and we need to brighten her face. Okay, so I don't want to brighten her arms. And then we can check the background. Okay, so look at what a nice job it's doing in terms of, I don't want to do clarity because then it sort of starts to look bizarre, but taking away the texture and the sharpness, you get sort of this look that she's standing farther away from it. Okay, because with portraits, you generally want the subject further away from the background, and that's how you could have done this in camera, right, to soften the background. And then I'm just going to add that one more that I just mentioned using a radial gradient to brighten her face. Okay, so I'm just going to increase the exposure a little bit. And let's do whites as well. Okay, so see how whites brings out sort of what I call the mask of the face. Right? That looks pretty good. Okay, so before and after. And that was just copy and paste with a couple of adjustments. We could come in and try and remove this hair tie. Doing that in Lightroom is going to be really tricky, but let's give it a go. We can use the healing tool. Right? So I'm going to use heal. And when you're doing this one, it's easier to do the bits in the middle first, right? Don't touch the edge. Okay, so see how that's getting the skin color in there. I'm actually going to do less feather. Okay, let me do that again. So less feather, 100%. I'm just going to do the middle section, okay? And I'm trying to match the tones of this skin. Then I'm going to do another one on the edge. And this is where you have to match the edge of the skin, okay? Might have to use cologne on this one. No, see, that doesn't work. And this is where Photoshop really comes in and does a better job. Okay, so I'm going to do, here's a trick. Okay, so if I want to do the next section, I have to sort of go fake it like this and then move it in. Okay, like that. Now we're getting a better job. See how we're slowly getting rid of this. Yeah, it takes a lot more work in Lightroom to get rid of something like this. So let's actually take this to Photoshop. Okay, so if we want to remove that, she's also got some blemishes on her arms as well. Okay, so we could easily get rid of those in Photoshop. So I'm going to go edit in, and I'm not going to do it as a smart object. Well, I can, doesn't matter, because we're going to add some layers to do retouching. Okay. Thanks for coming, Marty. I'm glad you enjoyed that. And again, this is why I show both, because they really are a huge part of my workflow. I use both, especially when I'm doing people photos like this. Okay. Photoshop. Okay, so now I've opened this as a smart object. And let me just get my layers over here. Okay, so you can see this as a layer. To do editing where I want to remove this little thing on her arm, I'm going to create a new blank layer. Okay, and the reason that I do that is you can't clone on a smart object, but if you duplicate the layer, it just makes the file that much bigger, and you can do it on a blank layer just the same. Okay, so I'm going to come in here, and then I'm just going to grab the healing tool, and I want the one that makes me select the point. Okay, so it's this one, not the one with the spot. Okay, so I got to select the point, and then I can just start painting in. Okay, so that did a pretty good job. Okay, notice the hardness of my brush is fairly high, so I'm going to do it again here. Right, that's pretty close. And now here I'm going to go right on the edge. Okay, and try and match up the edge of her arm. See that? And of course, the problem is her hair is there. So let's try over here. Let's try with the arm. Yep, tricky. This one is tricky. I'm going to use the stamp tool instead, which is this guy. And I'm going to do light and blend mode, opacity 100%. And again, I'm just going to sample from nearby and paint in. Okay, so here I can just paint in to get rid of this, blend in this thing a little bit into her hair. Getting close. Okay, so it's a little bit of a nightmare to remove this thing, and you have to use a few different tools. Okay, because the spot healing brush isn't the best for blending, and the healing brush leaves sort of these edges. So you need a combination of both here. Let's try another approach. Just like all. Okay, so another approach is we could use the lasso. Oops. Let's use the lasso. I need to do that on here. So you need to do the lasso. I believe I need to do that on this layer, okay, because she is on the layer below. And then we'll do it on this layer, and I'm going to go edit, content aware fill. And if I select all layers, it should give me the option of trying to fill in this thing here on her arm. Nope. Okay, let me cancel out of that. I need to do that on this layer. Okay, so select. I don't think it's going to let me do content aware fill on here. I have to rasterize this layer. So there are some disadvantages to smart objects. I can't do cloning and content aware fill directly on it. Okay, so let's see what content aware fill does now. Okay, so now it's filling her arm with her necklace, which is not so great. But we can say, okay, let me try and solve that a little bit. Where are my tools? My tools are missing. Aha. Okay. So I can say, okay, I don't want to use this part here. Okay. So when I'm erasing, this is the erase minus here. I'm saying don't take into consideration this part. Okay. So now when it previews, there's her arm. What a good job. It's done. Okay. Sorry, I've got two screens going on here. So I'm just going to hit apply. And there we have a better, it's not perfect, but I can blend that in a little bit easier using the clone stamp tool now, right? So that's why, again, I would not stamp directly on this layer. I would use a new layer, right? And make sure I'm sampling all layers here. And in this case, I'm just going to do normal. And you can see that I'm zooming in quite far, right? Zooming in quite far, like 100%, so that when I'm painting on this edge here, I'm getting as accurate as possible. I'm trying to get a nice smooth blend. And the same thing here, right? So I might just be able to fill this in with this guy. In this case, I do want this one with the circle on it, because if I draw along the edge here, see how it filled that in nicely? And it might do the same over here. Nope. But that's pretty good. But this one is great for getting rid of spots like this. You literally just draw them over. It's like the erase tool in Luminar. And you just kind of like so. Okay. Just checking to see if there's any others. Right now, she does have some blemishes on her face, which it didn't get because we didn't run it through Luminar. So you can use the spot healing tool on here to get these guys as well. My general rule of thumb when I'm editing people photos is anything that is temporary, like a blemish, needs to go. And anything that is permanent, like a scar, should stay. And how much it gets softened or lessened depends on the customer or the person in the photos. And you really need to discuss it with them. Okay. So don't go changing stuff. And that applies to wrinkles as well. Now, if I want to lighten her circles under her eyes here, just use the stamp tool. So that's S on the keyboard shortcut. Rob, if you could please share both a link to the Photoshop keyboard shortcuts free PDF and the Lightroom one, if people want to download those keyboard shortcuts. So I'm using the clone stamp tool, S on the keyboard, and I'm going to use it in lighten blend mode. Okay. She's done some weird makeup under her eyes. She's got these white lines, and I thought at first that it was something that had happened in my editing, but it's just some makeup, I think. Okay. Then I'm going to use the tool at 30% opacity, and I just hit 3 on my keyboard and it will change that. Right? Then I get a fairly big brush and I'm going to select an area. So I'm holding down the Alt Option key. So I'm selecting just below her eye. And then when I paint up like this, see how it's just lightening that circle under her eye. So I'm not completely removing it, but I'm just lightening it. Okay? And you can do that same thing with a wrinkle or a scar. Just lighten or soften. Don't necessarily remove it. Okay? So then once we're done in Photoshop, I just hit save and close, and it will bring her back to Lightroom. Okay. So we've kind of gone deep on portrait editing today, which is a great topic. And part of the reason, again, that I did a combination of Lightroom and Luminar is because that's how I use it in my workflow. And then we popped over to Photoshop to do the removal of the little hair tie on her wrist, right? So for more advanced editing. Right? And I probably could have done a pretty good job erasing that in Luminar as well with the erase tool. Is there any questions? I'm probably going to leave it here for this week. Let me just see if I've got any other portraits that we could apply these on. I think I do have one of Holly's. I do. Yeah, let's just see. Let me grab these. Oops. Let me grab these two. And let's see if any of these presets that I made work well on this one. So let's see. That's the JPEG. I'm going to do a copy again. So copy, background. I'm going to make sure spot removal is removed just in case I did any spot removal. And then I'm going to paste it onto this one. Okay. So let's see how it did. Needs a little color correction, right? Skin. Let's see if it shows the right color range. Okay, color range, subject. Okay. Background, right? Now the background, it's done a good job selecting. And in this case, it's made it sort of blue and darker. I don't want to darken it. I actually maybe want to brighten the background a little bit because it's a little too dark. And then let's just go back and correct some basic things on them. So too much white. That's better. Let's see how our white balance is. A little bit too yellow. And I think I added skin. I darkened with a suntan, but this girl has more of a tan. So I'm just going to do lighten instead, or general. And she's also got sort of more of a tan than he does. So I could even mask that further, right? If I want it less off of her. So I can just say I want to subtract and use the brush. Apologies if I'm going too fast. Ask a question. Okay. So I'm going to paint or erase by subtracting at 30% off of her. So I'm going to apply it less to her than it is to him. Okay. And maybe a little bit less contrast for them as well. Okay. That's better. So see how quickly I took it from that to that. Oh, looks like we're adjusting something here in the transform. No, something's going on there. And to see the edges of that is being, I think it's the optics, lens corrections being applied. There we go. There we go. That's better. All right. So see how we took it from that to that by applying that other preset from a studio for portrait by a totally different photographer with just a couple of tweaks. Okay. Now, if we want to take it to the same one over here, I'm going to copy again and apply it on this one. I believe it's her daughter's. Now we end up with this same transform issue again. There we go. All right, so let's see what we did here. Okay, definitely the original color was better. So we're going to go back to the original color. That looks good. Okay. Look at how it's done a nice job on the background in terms of blurring the background. So let me show you a trick on this one, right? So we'll copy the skin again. We're going to get color range. And I don't need this one. And on the background, we don't need the blue, okay? So we don't need it to be blue. We want the color there. But if I do the blue, see how it kind of dials that down a little bit? Maybe I'll just desaturate it a tiny bit, okay? And I'm going to bring the highlights down. Look what that's doing on the background. And in this case, I might darken it a little bit, okay? So a trick with this one here is because I am blurring, I'm going to take it to the nth degree here. So I'm going to do minus sharpness, minus texture, minus clarity all the way. So the bit that's closest to them should be sharp, like the same spot where they're standing, they're sharp. So the spot where they're standing should be sharp. There's an easy way to do that here, right? So if I turn on the overlay, that's just with the O key, and you can see it's also getting her foot, so I can fix that too. So I'm going to subtract, okay? So I want to not include. So subtract means do not include this part, and I'm going to use a linear gradient. So I'm just going to come up from the bottom, and that's going to fix the foot issue as well, right? So it's not going to blur anything at the bottom, only starting from there up. See that? So now that's the mask. And if I turn it off and I just darken, okay, you can see where it's applying. So the masking tools in Lightroom are super powerful. Super, super powerful. Okay, so a little too much blur. Okay, see how that's working? Now this one is a raw file, right, which is Canon. So if we want to pick a different profile, right, for example, camera standard, look at how much punch they immediately have. Okay. Bring them up a little bit. And once again, I've used copy and paste from a completely different image. So you can see how quickly you can use to batch images that are completely different, right? Different photo sessions, and in this case, even different photographers. Right? Well, think about it this way, Stephanie. Okay, so if you haven't used copy and paste on different photos with different subjects, right? That's basically what you're doing with a preset, right? So all you're doing with a preset is saving them and then copying them later. That's it, right? So the image that the preset was created on is completely different. So if you're copy and pasting, it's the same thing, okay? So I'm glad you picked up that great tip today. And I think we're going to end there for today. I'm going to come back to remind everybody to please submit your images. And if you're not already in my Lightroom course, the tips that I've given today are some things that you will learn inside the complete course for Lightroom users. So I go right from the beginning, getting your images into Lightroom, how to use the library module, all the modules, develop to the maximum of your abilities, right? Starting from scratch if you know absolutely nothing about Lightroom. So check that out. If you could please put a link to our Lightroom course in the chat, please, Rob. And reminder, of where they can submit their images to next week's. We'll be doing Luminar. So if you submit your images, indicate whether your primary photo editor is Luminar or Lightroom, and I'm trying to edit your image in the one that you use so that you can follow along and try and replicate my edits. Right? So for you that for those of you that I've edited your images today, so that would be Holly and Danny for the most part, see what you can do about coming up with similar edits to match what I've done today. Remember, I want to have fall images and images of water. So submit your fall and or water images as soon as possible. And we'll do some theme edits coming up in the next few weeks. Until then, take care, and we'll see you next time.